everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this session on the creative economy and how culture, art, everything under that umbrella can and already is in many ways shifting systems, creating new infrastructure, and enabling the creation of more resilience across certain communities. I have an esteemed panel of guests. I'm very excited to introduce Nisa Jetta, who is a strategist working across many different markets from finance and private equity to culture and governance, and to Leopoldo Gu. Am I pronouncing your name correctly? Your last
Yeah.
name, Leopoldo? Okay, I wanted to make sure.
Yeah.
Leopoldo Gu, fascinating background in art, culture, conservation, bringing all three of those disciplines together really miraculously. And because they have so much insight and life experience to share around this particular topic, I'm going to go straight into questions, and they can feel free to weave in some of their bio and some of the answers. I'm sure that will happen somewhat organically. So, Leopoldo, I love the setting that you're in, and I love that you're wearing your artist mock and everything right now, because that's a great setting to preface this conversation and get some of your background and insights around how art and culture can actually create resilience for communities. You've done work in Oaxaca, Mexico City, New York, all over the world. You're doing work around conservation and really working to uplift communities with your creativity. So I'd love to hear from you, um, what you think is needed to continue to bring more attention to that intersection, and what you're seeing actually work when it comes to creativity and communities and helping create more resilience.
But Art, it's a great question, and I thank you so much for having me here. I'm very excited to meet both of you, very accomplished, powerful creators as well in your own worlds. So I couldn't be happier, and whoever is listening to this kind of like a weird forum because my life is kind of the opposite. I'm in the field or I'm in the studios that I have in Mexico and in New York, and my work has always been a reactive world where I've just had a big life and I've reacted to that life. So a lot of my paths in art and in sustainability and the things that I'm doing have been reactions to things that happened. Because since I was like out of my mom's birth canal, I was an artist, and my mom, rest in peace, she keeps saying, said to me while I was a little kid, it was like, "You're an artist. That's not." I almost didn't have any choice, and as I grew up, uh, she empowered me to be curious, and I think that's the superpower that artists have that I love to express to everybody in this call, because everybody has an art form. Even if you're a collector, that's an art form. For me, art is not a luxury acquisition. For me, art is of essence, an essence to survive. In all religions, there's art. In all belief systems, there's art. In all structures, there's art. And to me, it's not about, uh, uh, um, there's no other choice. So, as I was imparted by my mother, that incredible sense of curiosity, that took me from one place to another place until I realized, ay carambas, I am creating something with an indigenous community in Oaxaca. That was out of like trying to connect with my late dad. He also passed away, and I had a terrible relation with my father. And I discovered later in life that he had Zapotec, which is an indigenous culture in Oaxaca and in Chiapas, and that was flowing through his veins. So it was flowing to mine. So I just wanted to connect with where he came from, because I feel that at the end of his life, I kind of saved us from, a cycle of misunderstandings that we had in my childhood. And that curiosity has been the sustainable like thread line in my work. So it's always been about that issue of looking to your neighbor, looking to your right or your left with an open heart. And I feel like everybody has a little bit of that. You just have to carve it. It's like that famous quote of Picasso. It's like I painted like an adult, and it took me a whole life to paint like a child. And I really believe that he had something to say about that, because it is the awness of the world. Like, look at the color blue, how beautiful it is, that some people lose. And if you look at the world that we live in, where there are companies that are affecting sustainability through their overproduction, whether it's political figures who are mean to other people, where there are people that hate each other, it's always the lack of curiosity that's at the heart of the problem. And I love that about artists. Some people have told me in the art world, oh, the art market is blah, 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 and it's too full, so many artists. And I say, no, there's not. There's not enough. I would like more artists. Everybody has a voice, everybody has a place in time. And my invitation to everyone in this conversation is grab a pad, stay curious, and do a doodle. And I swear that your life will be better. It is by Harvard proven that curiosity of art enhances about 35% your lifespan if you collect art or engage in art or go to a museum in a consistent basis. It enhances your life. So I feel the privilege of having that since I'm a kid. And I think that curiosity has led me into just being looking at the world as it is. And now that I'm working with, as you mentioned in your question, with sustainable projects in Oaxaca or with the whales in Baja or with different kind of like structural huge projects that I have, it has been a result of that curiosity. It hasn't been like, oh, I want to save this thing or I want to save the planet. It was, in fact, it was triggered both by my mother, my late mother, but also by a dinner that I had with Sebastião Salgado, who was a very famous Brazilian photography. I also encourage everyone in this call to go into online and look for him, Sebastião Salgado. And I had a beautiful dinner with him, and he like 50 years before our dinner, he passed away as well, but he bought a big piece of land in Brazil that was completely scorched by cutting of woods in the Amazon and turning it into like a wasteland, and nothing was there, no animals, and by himself, not any government help, just selling one photograph at a time. His wife and himself, they rebirthed this beautiful land, and now there's thousands of species that just very quickly went back to it. So my answer to you is just the thread of curiosity would inevitably lead you to friendship, not just with your neighbors, but with your planet and with its resources. I hope I'm answering your question.
You are so beautifully and in such an articulate, colorful way. Thank you for that. I mean, art, storytelling, expression is really the driver of creating empathy. And we need, if we're going to change any kind of systems in this world, we need empathy. We need understanding across borders, across disciplines, across sectors, across geographies, across geopolitical agendas. We need all of that. And so thank you so much for sharing that initial insight. Nisa, I'm going to go to you now. And it might seem like, well, you and Leopoldo obviously operate in very different worlds, but based on our prep call yesterday, you're coming from a very similar place in terms of the intention and motivation and what you're seeing when it comes to how much culture and art and the creative economy can actually create resilience throughout communities and actually do things to create lasting change. So, based on what you're seeing in terms of the way that culture and create the creative economy can move markets, and based on what you're seeing how it is moving markets, what are the main drivers of that? Why do you think this is happening now? I mean, we're seeing at COP that the creative economy is now being included in the actual COP agenda. So that's been very exciting, but I'd love your take on what's prompting this and how has that evolved, and where do you see this going?
Yeah, no, well, it's probably my favorite question right now because I think that a lot of people are kind of confused why someone who was an attorney, worked in private equity, kind of navigated a lot of the UN and WEF circles is now honing in on this specific space. And Melissa, I also realized nobody introduced you, but you are just such a force with kind of the communication stuff you're doing through Reverb and the Billie Eilish mandate through that, as well as like your incredible journey as a journalist. So just first off, grateful that we get to, be on a panel with someone like you. And also, yes, to your point, like just now seeing culture baked into a lot of these agendas, I think it's fascinating. So my husband always tells me get to the point. So I did make a list in trying to be kind of as cohesive as possible. But I think to your point right now, we're at kind of a very interesting navigation point right now where we do first off need creative leadership. And we are seeing this moment of political volatility, environmental thresholds, economic realignments, and convergence all at once, right? Like everyone is very almost tired and fatigued with this multipolarization and what our allies were one day or not the next. So we are just really truly at an inflection point of seeing the weight of new realities and what that really means for climate displacement, AI, and human centric economies, as well as the cultural fragmentation. So when you think from honestly as an investor standpoint, I would say that the intersection of culture and creativity around systems change is almost being used as a vertical for diligence, right? So, to Leopoldo's point, how do you create in a multipolar world when global governance is kind of segueing into new thresholds? Trust-based infrastructure, it's culture, it's community, it's how are you getting the buy-in from a lot of that, and you are building cultural infrastructure and a lot of philanthropy and other kind of family offices or verticals that were able to deploy capital very quickly. We are seeing a geopolitical you know miss of where that funding is now going, but community-based leadership around creative leadership creates automatic legitimacy, right? I then am able to align, and we understand more on what's going on the ground from storytelling, design, music, cultural production, how people understand justice, what their thoughts are around institutions, and really aligning public imagination toward a collective, right? So we are seeing this really around designing the next planetary transition and using different vernacular. What was a canvas around ESG? A lot of these bigger conversations are now happening under the cultural lens in a non political polarized way. And I think that that's where we can really talk through regenerative economic models and why that means it's regenerative to ecosystems. And we're helping translate a lot of this complex climate and regulatory frameworks where we can talk about something I say is like impact governance and a global shift in supply chains, and how do we think about systems literacy. And as we navigate this multipolar world, we're seeing that this is where a lot of the diplomacy comes in, like cultural diplomacy. These creative strategists and leaders on the ground are able to navigate new structures, are able to get buy-in, are able to really create investable assets for long-term change. And so I personally am hugely excited about the aspect of what this window in the world creates, as well as the ROI of now investing in something for a systems lens through the creative. And the creative economy also has a considerable amount of ROI for mental health, wellness, and also it gives you a very interesting diligence lens to the boots, what's actually happening on the ground. And that kind of narrative upbringing is a hugely important asset. And it's not just soft power anymore, it's actually becoming an investable asset. So, very excited. I think that there's a lot that can come from this, and it's still early stage and emerging, but great question.
Yeah. Well, I just want to say thank you for introducing me. I actually should have given a little bit more
Thank you.
context on
You're
my
great.
background, but thank you for doing that job for me. And just listening to you talk about this, hearing you use the word soft power, how this is no longer being viewed as soft power. The term soft power was always a very confusing term to me because power is power. Reaching people, having influence and being able to harness that to create good in the world, that's power. I don't think it should be hard or soft. It's just power, and it's beautiful when it's put to good use to actually build a better world. My next question is for both of you. One of the themes that often comes up at Davos is trust, right? And that's just such a ubiquitous term and an idea, especially in a time where there is a lot of polarization happening around the world. In each of your respective worlds, Nisa, in your domain, you've been to a lot of UN, Davos, those ecosystems. And Leopoldo, I mean, I feel like you've been just everywhere in the New York art world, in local communities on the front lines, the work that you're doing with the Whales Project in Japan, which I'd like you to get into later. But do you have examples of where you've seen creativity create or cultivate trust, whether that's across sectors or organizations or within communities where you've seen that be a real lever and how vital it is to actually creating trust and building some kind of solidarity across groups of different groups that may seem like they might like may seem like unlikely alliances.
Nisa, you would like to start?
Happy to start. Also happy to go second.
No, no,
Whatever
ladies
works.
first, always. Otherwise, my
Okay.
mom will come. My mother will come down from heaven and slap me.
Mhm.
Okay. Well, thank you. Love the manners. I think like what really struck me about like two case examples was that I have been seeing how, if you operate within the hospitality space, if you invest in an infrastructure and you train the local people and you invest in human capital, they feel they have more skin in the game, right? So there is kind of this aspect of where, the community feeds you and you feed it back. And that's kind of the thesis around what I was talking about the global commons. It's the air we breathe, it's the water. And when you are coming from a fund structure, there's this term skin in the game, right? Like all the parties are humans. We have kind of a vested interest to make this work. So just like navigating, looking at a lot of the investment verticals that are looking at that, or you have board members that now represent nature or the climate, which I think are fascinating to see that we have this advocacy. And we're also seeing that, policy can go so far, and why I hone in on legal structures. It's legally binding now to do this and deploy capital. I think case examples and things that have excited me. I think at the end of last year, early this year, the World Bank's kind of investment forum, which was the IFC and Proparco, the French government, collectively decided to deploy capital around creative cultural tourism. They also decided, there's this bucket called development finance institutions. So a lot of them are first loss capital. They'll say, we just want to get this moving. And they use that term to deploy things like catalytic capital. So if we invest in $1, X amount of people will benefit from something like that. And I found that the true first of like Africa's creative financing gap. And what they did was around sports and entertainment. And they basically their thesis was that if we invest in stadiums and these types of hospitality and entertainment vehicles, we are really able to create community development. We are able to have buy-in from the local indigenous people, as well as, Africa, 1 in 4 people in 2050, I think, will be from Africa, and a considerable amount will be under 18. And you would never see at this stage, and then Helios, a very developed private equity manager in Africa, all came together in an SPV. So it was the most fascinating moment where you're like, wow, dot in history. Now we are getting development finance institutions that would only deploy, for things that were catalytic around humanitarian or emerging markets, are seeing actually the culture and creative economy is something we need to have as an investment vertical because we can see how much of an ROI that happens to be. And if we look at numbers, 2.25 trillion of the global economy is now creative economy, but it's only a very small portion and it will continue to grow. And if we think that's 3% of GDP right now, and if 30 to 40% will be tourism based, think about like the impact of, locals, indigenous, the way in which, the first question was like, I work at very top down and culture and creatives work very bottom up, but this is a huge conversation opener. Never have we had all sectors kind of come in. And Melissa, to your point, it's when we talk about some of these funds and managers doing diligence on their assets, they're going to look to Leopoldo. They're going to look to those communities. They're going to understand why these assets become so important, not from an aesthetic and creative aspect, but from a storytelling and also to understand what's happening on the ground. So I think for me, it was like fascinating to see how these types of parties have come together, deployed capital, put their money where their mouth is, and actually really shifting such a new discussion, which, operating in the private equity space and being a lawyer for 10, 12 years, had never seen that. So I was hugely excited about, wow, like people are trying to listen to where this needs to go. And I think the market is really moving. My last point on this is that I think the emerging markets are a really huge opportunity. We're seeing, what happened with Afrobeats in Africa, South Korea. And I really, when I worked in emerging markets, really thought about, you see the M-Pesa model where you had in Kenya no phones to mobile banking, right? They are able to do something called leapfrogging, right? Like they don't have the legacy gymnastics of the global north. And I think what we're seeing at COP with a lot of these parties come out, typical global north countries, it's a huge opportunity for the global south to say, hey, let's learn a different model. We can move faster, and we are really also being able to show the ROI. And I think this is where, if globalization and multilateralism is getting a bad name, what a huge opportunity to teach around ways the world still talks to one another through culture and the arts, because it's not political. So I'm really fascinated about where this bakes into a lot of investment models, how, there is now institutional capital and weight being deployed, and how that is actually, to your point, Mel, really creating people who would never talk to one another, be at the table and really think through systems mapping. So really grateful to be working on this at this time.
Yeah, thank you for those insights and just adding on to what you were saying about how this can create bridges for people that normally wouldn't be in the same rooms or the same decision making tables. And I believe that that's the whole point of really actually looking at how to change systems, right? If we don't have different people at those decision making tables, if we don't start bringing in different facets of culture and the way communities view things and what their needs are, then we're not going to change anything. We're just going to keep replicating the same problems. But you mentioned some stats around GDP and some other figures. And I don't want you to repeat those figures, but as you were talking about that, I started to realize I would love for us to, or for you each to kind of share your perspective on what is encapsulated in the creative economy. When we're talking about culture and creative economy, I know I have my view on this, but it is so broad. So, what are you encapsulating in that when you're thinking of the term of creative economy? What does that include?
Yeah, Leopoldo, do you want to jump in
I
or?
mean, to me, it's the opposite of complete opposite of, but complementary. Not opposite in how. What's the best word? It's. I'm instead of from the up from the top to the bottom. I'm from the bottom to the top. Like I am a granular maker of things. So I've been very lucky in being born in Mexico and immigrating to the States after a full scholarship in England of art. I was able to travel all over the world, and I've been super lucky that my career has been a little bit insane because I do both arts, like visual art, contemporary art, and I also do movies and books and TV shows and documentaries. So I've really tasted the entire spectrum of what I call some of the creative uh, community of and systems that really touch. When you make films, I've been in Vietnam making films, and in Cambodia, and in Argentina, and in Africa. And when you make a film, it's kind of like a mini company that you go and start from scratch. And in Hollywood, they used to bring all of their people and kind of like take over a place, but being raised in Mexico, we kind of took a very different approach, and we learned to make movies as we were kids, just making them. And I was very lucky to get a lot of very big jobs and projects through extraordinary people from David Byrne to, big Hollywood studios. And a lot of the movies that we made, it was like my brother and I would go into these places we've never been in and just meet people and build the businesses around what was available with the equipment they had and with the language they had. And we tried to bring as little extra people as possible because we wanted to learn from those communities. So I come from a place of privilege of the creative economy because to me, making art is a privilege. And I've been lucky that I've been able to do these art forms across so many different fields in so many different countries. And it's extraordinary because you go there to a place and you bring in a vision and a story to tell, and then you have to recruit the best that you can find with your resources. And it was just fantastic because it opens so many doors. I mean, I can't tell you how many places I've been that people told me, "Oh, don't go to this area; they will kidnap you," and blah blah blah. And we talking with the leaders of the community. Some people were good people, some people were bad people, but we still find, through art, we managed to be in the most extraordinary places and I've almost never had any problems. I mean, you always, I had a big life, so obviously there's been some problems, but the impact of where you live it, both in the film world and in the art world, have been to me very rewarding. Like the project I'm doing in with the whales started with me getting a huge project from Netflix, a TV show that I created with my brother called El Elegido that is right now on Netflix, and we hired hundreds and hundreds of people in the whole Central Baja. But what was incredible about it, including one of the lead characters, was a Yaqui indigenous family who, because we included their language into the show because they were there and we were writing this drama echoing what we found in the space. But what I found that was incredible, kind of like jumping from the micro of me making a TV show for Netflix through my art, is that the Mexican government that has had lots of criticism for years, it's one of the best places I've ever encountered of resources and protection to the whales, because we wanted part of the magic and the mythology of that show was about some sort of like the sound of the whales. We were very inspired by it once. And we realized that it was very difficult to go. You can go and see them, but to go and dive with them, the Mexican government and the Mexican Marine forces have been amazing at protecting them. And we had to go through hoops and hoops of officials and nature conservation ecologists to be able to shoot underwater with the whales. And it was amazing how they protect them. The people that work there were all indigenous people from the land, and how they've been building these oases for them not to be hunted. And obviously, because it's the Sea of Cortez, it's protected by the two coasts of Mexico. So Mexico can really protect that water. That is 100% Mexican water. And it's been amazing. I was really moved by it. So I feel that my encounters with the creative economy has only been across multiple things, multiple peoples, multiple countries. But in the privilege of making art, it's always been positive. So it's very hard for me to see on the newspaper and on other places the negative side of things, because in real life that I've encountered, I've only met super inspiring people that have changed my life. From Sebastião Salgado, a Brazilian guy, to the Mexican indigenous people I'm working, making huge tapestries in Oaxaca. So everything has been like that. It's like a constant positive of friendship and building bridges, not building walls across many different countries and places and peoples. So I'm kind of like the worst person to talk about this, because I only see positivity, and I choose that love and I choose that hope, because what is art if not hope?
Well, I would argue with you that rather than being the worst person to talk to about this, you might be one of the best, because of the positivity, because of the positive charge that you bring to these experiences. And likely that's why you're attracting so many people that are so brilliantly aligned with your vision and the different works of art that you create. I'm glad you brought up the Mexico example with the government and the people and the water and the local community, because hearing how all those different ecosystems intersected and that there was collaboration and cooperation is exactly why we're having this conversation, right? Can you talk a little bit more about, before I go back to Nisa, can you provide a little more context about the whale project that you're talking about, just so that people who are watching understand what the scope of the project is and what your vision is for that?
Sure. So I do projects that I do are journeys. Sometimes they start in a meeting in a bar that end up in a feature film like Molly's Game, a feature film I did with Aaron Sorkin. It started with me meeting the real Molly in a bar in New York, making a book, and then making a movie. I never know the form. It could end up in a painting. I never know nor have rules of where I'm going to lead my life with. And that freedom is kind of like the good part of being an artist. The bad part is that you're putting your emotions, you're exposing your soul constantly, and people judge it all the time. But the good part is that you get the privilege of living life fully with jazz everywhere. And the Wales project started because we were writing this TV show in Mexico for Netflix based on a graphic novel. And we were shooting, but the way my brother and I work in film, as a visual artist, I work on my own, but in film, I try to work with my brother or other collaborators because film takes too many people, and he's a brilliant director. So we were in we write our content through experiencing the places. Some other writers in Hollywood write first, and then they go and shoot and try to fit the writing into the place. We like to write for the place, and we found that you save money, you get closer to the community, and then you integrate the community into your productions. And I have 20 years of doing this very successfully across multiple formats in the film and TV business. And in this show, we're writing in Baja, and we're like, I've seen whales. I put my hands over whales in the past. So, and the sound of it, I was experimenting a deep dive into research of what people are doing with trying to understand the language of whales. So in the writing of the show, my brother and I really wanted to go into shoot with the whales there and try to capture the film respectfully and without hurting them or anything like that. So they were part of the magic of the mythology of the show. And when I was there, I had this extraordinary moment of clarity because one way I'm a terrible diver, I can't do it. I'm terrified of the ocean, but I was there floating like a buoy, and a whale came really close to me, and it kept um, scaring away the other whales. And those whales were the guy who was running the operation from the Nature Conservancy said to me, "What's happened is this whale is adopting you, and it's telling other whales that you are his human." So she was going around and going like, "Leave me alone. This is my human." And she was coming really near me with her eyeball. I don't know why I call it her because I'm very maternal in my spirit. I'm kind of a feminist. So like she was looking at me straight up, and I had a semi-religious moment. And after that moment, I started to draw and paint and work with them. And 4 or 5 years later, with oceans of research, drawings, paintings, sculptures, the goal is to make a few things that hopefully next year is doing a show in Japan, just because after all my research in Japan, they still hunt them. And I found a very big art collective family that might sponsor my show. And the show is like a group of films, art, sculptures, interactive sound, and a vinyl full musical album co-written by whales, where all the profit of these shows will be gone into a few very serious whale conservancy operations that really impact the whales themselves, not the bureaucracy around them. But I'm very studious about where the money that I raise through my art goes to. And this is a very ambitious project because I'm doing gigantic sculptures that have sound waves that I'm combining whale original sound that we recorded with music that I'm creating with a young composer from Mexico called Oriana Giri. She's a young composer that we compose music together. So the album will come out in a couple years and it will be sold hopefully forever with a beautiful experience that it's going to be co-written by Well. So these are journeys that I do that I don't have really a like a very simple uh end game. These are journeys that I take over and the different end games come to me. As I said to you before, I cannot react to the world and then I feel things with those journeys. So right now I am doing the vinyl album. I'm very good at completing things along the way. So we will have movies, we'll have art, we'll have prints, we'll have a lot of assets that are gorgeous and deep and beautiful. That is the language of art across all the different fields of art that I take. And I think that it's going to do very well commercially because my work sells. And I think I'm going to be able to give back a lot of the profits to the whales. And these are sentient, incredible beings. I encourage people to go to the website of SETI, CETI, which they've been very serious about compiling the language of whales and through AI, kind of trying to understand what they say. And they've been recording hundreds of thousands of hours, and they now have papers that are true scientific peer-to-peer papers that have been approved by a really serious group of scientists with no interests, financial interests in this. And the leader of the SETI is amazing. His name is David, and he doesn't take money from AI companies. They all want to invest in him, but he has been very adamant of not being beholden and not selling because he has thousands of hours on the on different parts of the world, especially in Costa Rica with whales, and he's not letting corporations just mine the information because that's the feeling that we all have about the mega companies in the entertainment business that it's going to become, they're all going to be consolidated, become mines for information, which again, I'm not attacking their business, but I'm saying that there's alternatives to be respectful and help the world in positive, powerful ways. So that's where I am. That is my vein, and that's the Whales Project. I hope I didn't took too much time.
No, thank you. Thank you for, I mean, the project sounds absolutely mesmerizing, and I will be following up with you because I want to go whale watching with you. Every time I go to Mexico, it's not the right season, and there's like, oh, they're not going to be out enough. So I definitely want to have those experiences. And I think that the idea, just the concept of that this project is co-written by whales, it's so beautiful to see more art projects emerging that are in many ways co-creating with nature. So thank you for sharing that, Leopoldo. Nisa, I'm just going to switch gears to you to kind of bring us back to the finance aspect of this. I mean, Leopoldo was talking a little bit about how everything's being financed. From an investment standpoint, there have been different initiatives and missions that investors and funders have gravitated to, I'd say I'm just going to look at the last 15 years or so, right? Because that's when I started to really get into social impact and into climate. Maybe 10, 15 years ago, gender equality, gender equity, women and girls was at the forefront of every single agenda of a major global event. And it still is often discussed. It doesn't seem quite as at the forefront as it was maybe a decade ago. Hopefully that's because it's just integrated more, but I would have to look at the data. And then maybe, 5 years ago, climate was that was the primary target everybody was talking about. Things seem to go in either trends or cycles. When it comes to investing in the creative economy, do you see this? Do you think this is going to be like one of those initiatives that is on every headline, every major foundation is talking about it, and then it's still important, but it's not getting quite as much attention or traction? And could that potentially happen with the creative economy? And what can we do to ensure that that it doesn't? Do you think from an investment standpoint, from a messaging standpoint, and just from the way that we're looking at how the creative economy converges with everything else?
Yeah, so I guess like, the to be poetic, right? I loved what Leopoldo said, and I just think I was recently at a very kind of high level, global convening, and I remember being like, we need to talk together and build together and play together and argue together. And I realized that as kind of this narrative shift around what's becoming the cultural arena. The second point I wanted to say is that, just you see creatives being very creative with being able to find solutions. So the solution matrix that Leopoldo mentioned, it's, I'm reacting to the world. Whereas sometimes when you have systems and institutions that have kind of a lot of legacy and infrastructure, it's harder to move. You can be diligencing the World Bank or the African Development Bank, which I have for a year, and then the government changes in a country, there's a new politician, you start from day one. So you almost see the creative sector a bit like how family offices, if they like you, they can deploy capital. A creative can say, I found a solution, I have buy-in from the community, I know how to build this, I know what part of the government is going to fund this, and you see it as a case example with our esteemed guest here, Leopoldo. The third point I want to make, and I do think about this a lot, about the narrative around the creative economy, super new. People are using it one way or the other way. I personally think their thesis encompasses like talent, technology, even value chains, I would say, that generate this economic value around creativity, cultural expression, intellectual property, and then also kind of around, the genesis around public imagination. And so it includes film, music, fashion, gaming, digital, cultural tourism. And if we think about that, it's 3% according to, the institutional stats right now of global GDP. But again, if you are, why I hone in on also policy reform is that it really does enable the floodgates to, in a sense, open, right? If we are participating and allowing for Leopoldo's and the artists to have proper governance infrastructure and legals and financing and capital available, we can be catalytic about their growth. So that number will continue to grow, in my view. And yes, I do see that. I remember famously when that McKinsey study came out and it said that if we baked in women to the economy, and forgive me if I'm wrong, but the last stat that I read was like 18 trillion of a balance sheet, right? And then these people will be educated, train their families, and contribute to taxes. And it's a very catalytic impact. We're seeing that with climate. Do I see this as the next trends? Yes, I do see that because I do think right now the world is in a very different place it was in 8 months, in a year. And I do feel a lot of participants that want to have some of these, let's say, sexy conversations feel that they will get politically blacklisted if they do, that their capital funding will go out of style. And it's a chance, people are kind of in a holding position, right? So at what color can we engage under? Everybody will, be able to kind of talk around certain things and symbols and practices and values. But I see them now being grateful to be in some of these rooms is that people are using cultural diplomacy. People are using it as a lens to say, okay, let's rebrand some of these words and talk about ESG and climate and some of this deployment, but also the storytelling around what this means and kind of a signal for what is to come. And a lot of philanthropic groups are also having this discussion. And I think it would be not smart not to do it, So I do feel that, again, like it is also a signal of where capital is moving. And we saw that, right? Like one of the biggest institutional investors has said, yeah, I'm going to put my name and put a ticket next to this. And it has enabled like private equity, institutional FCA, SEC regulated managers to say, oh, I can put my name behind this. And that's where you have first loss capital will de-risk an industry. And I think that it is now starting to prove the thesis where why aren't we investing in more of the Leopoldo ventures, right? A, we can't find them, we can't diligence them. The narrative always stays very grassroots. And I think if you want to be an established and good investor, there's diligence, and this is the best diligence. Like you're getting a pulse on the ground, right? Culture, creatives, even storytelling and songs, it's very obvious to what is happening geopolitically on the ground. You can very quickly understand what's happening in the community. Is there a soft war going on? Why is there civil unrest? And what's fascinating is that you're also seeing this now with like consumer behavior. Why do you think LVMH invests so much in cultural storytelling? You can see where brands put their money after having, like consumer behavior is also a trigger and signal point. And I think we're seeing that already with major cultural movements with Afrobeats, K-pop, global Latin American surge, and now we're seeing wonderful FDI entertainment districts being built, hotel and hospitality, the UN part of sustainability, and UN tourism are like, yes, let's talk about creative economies and districts. You're seeing partnerships with various labels and platforms, and specifically in the MENA region, sovereign wealth funds are like, we need to shift our economies away from oil dependence and other things. What a fascinating industry to play in is the creative economy. And so I do think these are signals. It's not only kind of small signals, it's very big signals right now. Like nations, countries, institutions, IGOs are saying, okay, it's A, smart politically because we can't use certain words, but B, we're actually getting a much better cultural pulse. And we are getting very different identity economics on the ground, which is really creating value creation in new markets. So I think that if you want to really stay true to what is coming, this is going to be definitely a movement. And we're seeing it around so many different verticals that are not just stagnant to, I think the moment I tell my husband the creative economy, he's like, okay, so like pop rap music. And I'm like, no, it's everything, right? It's a lot of these industries. And I think a big part of maybe what we should be doing is the education aspect, right? It's like disarming. And a big part of where you get the cultural buy-in is the storytelling. And I love the case studies that have been presented on this because it shows that, this is already happening. It needs to be funded. You are seeing upon funding, the policy does change. So you're democratizing access for smaller investors, for smaller culture and creative narratives to come in. And the last piece is that a big part of what I do and want to do more of is it's like, oh, how awful that, you have this struggling artists and they don't have the ability to pay for, legal structuring. So a lot of their creative IP often gets ripped off. And the Creative Commons is something that we really need to kind of build out that has a policy and legal framework that does protect the artists, right? Because at that stage, they'll be like, oh, I'll just get a day job. I won't focus on my passion. And that's why I think catalytic funding, institutional investors coming in, the storytelling around it, it's the same argument, Mel. What you're saying is like, wow, if we had baked women into the balance sheet, we would have actually had a much bigger economy. Not only like equality metrics, but it commercially makes sense, right? And same with the commercial creative economy and creative commons aspect around legal structures is also sending a demand signal to shift that upwards. But I'm sure like Leopoldo probably has a thought on, like how artists kind of struggle and how there maybe needs to be some policy reform around that because it must be very difficult. And I'm seeing that up and coming in my practice. So in short, yes, I think that it is a cultural lens and I'm very excited about it.
Yeah, well, and,
I
and
think,
to your
oh,
point
sorry, you go.
about, oh, sorry, yeah, I just wanted to interject quickly around you bringing up policy a couple times. You mentioned policy actually earlier in the conversation as well. Sometimes within the climate movement, I will be in conversations where people will argue over where money should go. Some will say, oh, it needs to entirely go into carbon markets because that's the only way corporations are going to do anything. And then some people say, no, it needs to go into adaptation because well, we need to adapt in order for communities to become resilient. They need funding, they need support, they need infrastructure, and we need to create policy around that. And other people will say, no, it needs to go around, whatever it is. There are these silos just within the climate movement itself where we're not unified. We're not a unified front. And my argument is that we need all of it. And if you look at the importance of culture, culture influences policy. Culture moves policy. It can be policy. We need policy reform to support culture and artists. But I think that we can also begin starting to really lean into the fact that culture moves and drives policy. Culture's
100%.
everything. You get people building their lifestyle a certain way and paying attention to certain content, certain entertainment, traveling a certain way, doing certain things within their own culture. A culture is so all encompassing. And so we need to be attacking it from so many different angles and across the board. Well, thanks for listening to my TED Talk. But anyway,
Love it.
Leopoldo, I interrupted you. Do you remember what you were going to say?
I was just agreeing with what Nisa and you said, and what arguably, for example, I was listening to you, Melissa, is that horrific but great photograph of the naked child in Vietnam running in the street kind of almost was a domino effect of ending the Vietnam War, and the cultural power of images of but that's one extreme version of things that move policy. But on the other extreme is, I do believe that the world would be better by supercharging culture. I mean, we put so much resources on all sorts of things, like, for example, architecture and buildings, and every architect gets which is also part of culture. But I argue that there should be more sculpture and more cinema in the streets, and more things that make no sense financially, but that brings people together culturally. And those things that bring people together produce financial success. So I'm very extreme of that. I'm an artist, so I will always defend we need more. And in terms of your discussion of like the policy of how just in climate change everybody has a different opinion, that's what we want. We want peer-to-peer discussions of adults in a room telling, we believe in this because of that, and those the scientific community is pretty great. Some people in power are not that great at listening to these people, but as an artist, it's the same with curators. A lot of people are down on curators and the big institutions of art. I've had a great relationship with them, and I love to be curated by human beings that are in some ways of their brain they're smarter than me, and clean out my mess and show it in better and better worlds. So I think that the leaning is more conversation, more peer-to-peer conversations, more discussions, and yes, more resources. And I feel like in the granular level, I have multiple families of indigenous people working for different things with me as my partner in Oaxaca. I have a sustainable glass mezcal company in reaction to the celebrity mezcal and tequila business that is gigantic. I mean, George Clooney made billions of dollars. I love him, but I wanted to show that there's a sustainable way in Mexico to be more respectful of our water, Mexican plants, which are not like gin or barley that you can make gin in a tub in prison, and but tequila and mezcal, which are huge businesses, these plants, you need 20 years to make each plant. So how can we be more responsible with that? And that's oceans of economic success, at least for Mexico. So there are many ways in a granular level that I can answer your conundrums. I can't talk about anything else except my lane, which is how I can grab a story. Like, I was with one of my oldest friends, and her husband is a scientist in Oaxaca, working with these indigenous people, and he was trying to make glass and mezcal more sustainable. And I was like, this is incredible. So I've just been selling paintings to fund some of his research. Along other, now this is 10 years later, there's multiple universities have been interested. A big, I think the cousin of Carlos Slim, which is one of the richest men in Mexico, funded some of his research. And this is all funding money, no strings attached, which for artists is important. And we've been multiple people offering us a ton of money to purchase our machine and what we built in Oaxaca. And we haven't sold it because it's not the time. Right now we want to build a case to make people aware that there's a way to make money and still be respectful to the land, to the culture, and to the water, because water is going to be a huge issue for this planet, that resource. So, so how can we reduce the costs of all of these things? So that is my plight. Is reacting to these journeys of cultural experiences in a passionate way, and feeling that through that art, maybe when I'm gone from this planet, I left a few seeds that will make a beautiful work for my children and for the children of all you. That's the plan. And how do you converge that things, and how do you simplify it? I don't know who's listening to this story, but it can start by person. Like everybody has assets, everybody has connections. That if you're working in a government, make it easier for somebody like me to make a sculpture in the streets. The only reason I don't make enough is because just the paperwork, I want to shoot myself before I do it.
It can be very bureaucratic. Yeah. Yeah.
Everybody can help a little bit, the cultural capital.
Yeah.
And every culture without the cultural capital, it's a dead culture. And look, I live in New York. All of Lower Manhattan, that is incredibly wealthy, was a drug infested world. And guess who moved in here before anybody else? Were artists, the Warhols and people like that. So I just invite everybody that is listening to, with all your resources, I don't care if you work in an office and you're a secretary or you're a leader, there's something you can do with your neighbor, with a leader of culture, with a young artist, with an old artist, whatever it is, there's something that you can do. Make it easier for that culture to grow and continue. Yep. And if everybody does a little thing, that collectively, there's nothing we can't do.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. We have 3 minutes left. We have 3 minutes left. Yeah, it actually went by very quickly, didn't it? So in 1.5 minutes, I would love insights from each of you before we close on just your thoughts on as the creative economy is being more integrated into global conversations around transforming systems, around creating more resilient communities. What's one thing that you think creative leaders can do to ensure that this conversation keeps moving forward and keeps advancing?
Lisa.
I'll go first. And I appreciate we are time poor, so mine is very short. And I just think that that famous quote by the ex-CEO of Starbucks or whatnot said, if I want to be told I can't do anything, I give it to a bunch of experts. And I think that is literally why creatives are so important to the conversation, is that they are resilient, they don't say no. And I feel like we are at a moment right now where you have the financial sector and other grassroots and creative sectors finally playing ball together. And that gives me hope. And I would say that my advice across both avenues is just like continuing to listen, because when we play together, we work together. And I think that, Leopoldo, you're wrong. You said, oh, it financially doesn't make sense to have another culture or build this. There is so much value in investing in community when we live in so much polarization. So I feel like it is actually the one thing that we should be investing in when we are targeting some of those other forces. So very grateful, very excited, and I would urge everyone to be very thoughtful and listen. So thank you for that.
Thank
Beautiful.
you. Do you want to add anything, Leopoldo? We have 1 minute if you'd like to add a final thought of inspiration. No pressure.
No, it's okay. I got you. 40,000 years ago, when we came down or 50, we don't really know. We came down from the trees and went into caves to protect ourselves, to collect food and sustain ourselves as a species. The first thing we did is start painting those walls. The first thing that humans did was reflect with culture, their environment, and their magic. And they started by creating magic. That hand pasted on a wall was the origin of our species. And I come back to it over and over again because I urge everybody here to create your magic and put your hand in the wall of humanity to add to it.
That is a beautiful note to end on. And I think we'll wrap here. Thank you both so much. We'll debrief offline.